What up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Coffee Hour with me here. It is Friday. We can get some applause for Friday. Okay, so got my coffee on hand and ready to get the week ended, but we still have a lot to do today. I'm sure you all do too as well, but thanks for joining me. Let me know in the chat where you're from. And let's see, we already got some. Dan, good morning from Chicago. I have a nephew who now lives in Chicago area, so I get with him. I don't know. Y'all got snow? Too cold and windy. What's up from Atlanta? Argo Electrical, welcome on the East Coast with me. See if we got any of our West Coasters up this early again. What's up, Eric? Welcome. Happy Friday. Happy Friday to those out there. So anyway, today's topic, we're going to talk a little bit. We're just going to have a casual conversation today. Remember, you can ask anything you want in the chat, and if I can't answer it, I will tell you to come to paulabernathy.com if it's very detailed and it's not something that's going to take us away from today's topic. But if I can answer it, I'll answer it. And certainly if it's germane to this topic that we're going to talk about in today's coffee hour, feel free to let me know. Edgar, good morning. Welcome. Thanks for joining me. So, all right. So let's kind of talk about what we're going to talk about. Now, yesterday's episode, we talked about Boxville, and, I got some emails from people who were like, look, I really needed that on Boxville. And so I encourage folks to, there are some people out there that say that kind of stuff won't appear on an exam. I know differently because I help write exams. So we'll take every opportunity to ask you something, whether or not it's about the equipment grounds, what's the cubic inches of a box, anything that make you have to go through the steps is game for an exam. So if somebody tells you otherwise, they don't know what they're talking about. Okay, they just have never done it before. Good morning, Kyle. Thanks for joining me from South Dakota. I imagine it is chilly in South Dakota as well. So, okay. So today is another example. We're going to just be talking about general things that have to do with receptacles and the circuits for receptacles and putting 20 amp receptacles on 15 amp overcurrent devices or putting 15 amps on 20. We're going to talk about all that kind of stuff today and give code references because I always like to back our stuff up by code references. The one thing I will say that I've noticed lately is please do not believe everything that somebody just tells you on a social media platform. It's one of those things where people are spouting off certain things and they're not backing it up with code or any type of fact. They're just spouting it off. So I encourage you, as always, just be careful. It doesn't mean they're wrong. It just means that you have to be extremely careful. It certainly doesn't mean you believe everything I say as well. You need to verify and look it up yourself and feel comfortable with something yourself. But if I'm going to tell it to you, then it's something that I personally will believe. Okay, so there we go. Welcome from Arizona. And we've got Roy from Knoxville, Tennessee. Good morning, Roy. And we have Eric who's telling us he's from Orange County, California, all the way out in California. What time is it in California right now? What is it? 4 o'clock or something like that in California? Wow. You are definitely an early riser. But as we always say, everything gets started on the East Coast. And since we have a government shutdown looming, hey, what better day than to have some coffee and talk electrical code. All right, so let's go on and go look at a lesson. 5 a.m. Eric's 5 a.m. back on the West Coast. It's too early. Early for me. All right, so let's go on and get into talk a little bit about today's lesson or what we're going to talk about. Of course, y'all can ask questions, in the chat. Obviously, the chat is working. It looks like everybody's from YouTube. I don't have anybody over on the Fast Tracks Tube watching. It doesn't look like anybody, or they haven't commented. Okay, so if you get a chance, check out Fast Tracks Tube and tell me what you think when it comes to the lives that go over there. So if you're over there, let me know. Comment over there. On that one's a little different. You have to click the comment box and put your name in to comment, things like that type of thing. So a little different over on our platform. We do things a little different, obviously. All right, so we're going to be talking first. Let's just talk receptacles. And let's talk ampacity ratings of receptacles first. Let's kind of just have a conversation about that. As you see in the code here, and again, this is out of Unit 6 in our Fast Tracks program. It says receptacle branch circuits must have a rating of 20 amps for laundry circuits, bathrooms, garages, kitchens, except, now here's where a lot of people get confused in this one, except for refrigeration equipment supplied from an individual branch circuit 15 amperes or greater. So generally the code will say that you have the small appliance branch circuits and that you put the refrigerator, for example, on that small appliance branch circuit. That's generally what you do. People will say, but what if, is there allowance for me to run a separate individual branch circuit, okay, to, let's say, the refrigerator? Absolutely you can. And the code gives you a provision for that. And it can be 15 or higher, right? So that's a separate individual branch circuit. Now, the other good thing about it is if you run this individual branch circuit, okay, it doesn't mean that you have to have another small appliance branch circuit in your calculation. In other words, we know a minimum of 2 at 1500 VA. If I run that individual 15 amp for that refrigerator, I don't have to take a VA account for that. That can be absorbed in our 3 VA per square foot for that application, okay? Now, same thing runs for, again, obviously, you have branch circuits, 20 amps for dining rooms, pantries. Somebody asked me about that the other day. Pantries can go by many names, but if it is for storing goods and it is off of the kitchen area or off of the dining area, it's for storing goods, then we would say that that is like a similar area, right? And the similar area is used quite a bit, and that's basically a catch-all, right? If it's used in a similar area for similar purposes as what you see in the list, okay, then in those areas, then you're going to do what? Then it's going to be a 20 amp branch circuit, okay? Now, throughout the remainder of the one family dwelling, the 15 amp receptacle branch circuits are allowed all through the structure, okay? So I have people that do contact me a lot, and they say, Paul, why the hell would I run a 15 amp circuit? I just run 20. That's totally up to you. That's a design thing. But there are certain places in the code where the 20 amp branch circuit is required, at least one, and you're probably going to have more than one. And in certain areas like kitchens, you're going to have at least a minimum of 2, that type of thing. So all kinds of different applications in the code, but just remember you have 210.11. And 210.11c is going to tell us that we have a minimum of 2 small appliance branch circuits. We're going to have at least 1 laundry circuit in a single family dwelling, okay? And then we're going to have a circuit for the bathrooms, and we're going to have for the bathroom receptacle, and we're going to have it for a garage if you have a garage, okay? All right. So lighting and receptacles here's another misconception that people seem to have. Lighting and receptacles can share the same branch circuit, right? It's a general statement. However, except for small appliance receptacles, garage receptacles, bathroom receptacles, okay, unless it's just one bathroom and the circuit enters that bathroom and it never leaves that bathroom, then you have an allowance to pick up the lighting as well. But that's only if you're supplying a single bathroom and you're not leaving that bathroom to take that circuit onto another bathroom, for example. Okay, so then you could have the lighting and the receptacles on it. But generally wise, all we're going to have on the lighting and the receptacles have to be on separate circuits, except in small appliance applications, garage applications, and bathrooms have separate circuits. Everywhere else in the dwelling, bedrooms, living rooms, we switch receptacles all the time in lieu of a lighting outlet. So, I mean, obviously they can be on the same circuit. Now, some people design it so they just put their lighting on one and the receptacles on the other. That's just the way they design it. That's okay too, if that's how you want to design it. The only caveat that I tell people that they obviously have to be aware of is the number of spaces that you have in your electrical panel. You start loading it up, and the next thing you know, you're going to have no spaces, right? So things to just be aware of, okay? Let's see here. So let's look a little bit at some of our illustrations and kind of hammer home some things that really, at this point, you just commit to memory, right? So look at A. For the A, first call out we have is A. So it says receptacle installed on a 15 amp circuit must have an ampacity rating of 15 amperes. Okay, so that's in 210.21b3. Okay, and we can go look at that, as you should if you're you're in your Fast Tracks program, you happen to be in the program, and you see these chevrons. Dude, by all means, the whole purpose is for you to go in and out of the code book, back into the course, into the code book. That's the purpose. Okay, in case anybody's ever wondered what the purpose is of the chevrons. It's not just to give you code reference. It's the hope that you will blow the dust off of your NEC and go look it up. That's the hope. Okay. So here's a 15 amp device. This is a 15 amp device. This happens to be a circuit breaker. This happens to be a receptacle device. Okay. 15 amps. Now, where do we see that in the code again? We can go to the code. And just because it made a reference, and we'll do this for like I say, craps and giggles, to make sure that we follow all of this and that we're following it up as we should. And so that is B3. So let me go on and share this. So here's B3, and I'll just see if it blows up. So here, so here's your little table. All right. So notice this says circuits serving more than one receptacle or receptacle outlet. Okay, so a duplex receptacle, by the way, is two receptacles, right? In case folks didn't know that, because you can have a simplex, which is a receptacle, right? And then you can have a duplex, which is two receptacles. So anywhere in the code that you happen to see something that says two or more receptacles, there are a lot of people that immediately gravitate towards thinking you have to have two duplexes for that rule to kick in. No, it's a duplex is two receptacles. Just so happens that they're both mounted on a single yoke, okay, or strap. But that's another thing that people tend to get confused with, okay? So in this case right here, since that picture we were looking at was a duplex, right? It is a 15 amp. And as you can see here, the receptacles rating is 15 amp, okay? And we'll obviously come back to this here in a second, okay? So that's what you see right here, okay? That's the layout. Perfect right there. Breaker, duplex. The next one is B. A 20 amp duplex receptacle shall not be installed on a 15 amp circuit, all right? So this is a 20 amp, and it's installed on a 15 amp overcurrent protective device. So if we go back to look at the code, here's what we're looking at right here. 15 or 20 amp can be on a 20 amp branch circuit, okay? But this 20 cannot be on a 15, right there in the code. And then a lot of people will question this, right? They'll say, what's the reasoning? What's the reasoning for this, right? Well, the reasoning is that it gives us the impression that, for example, we know that the devices themselves, typically a 15 and 20 amp receptacle, the internal guts are exactly the same. So through their testing, we know that a 15 or 20 amp device, okay, can handle 20 amps, right? But what we don't want to do is have a 20 amp device, okay, and have the potential for 20 amps of load to be placed on it onto a device that's only rated for 15 amps. You'll have it constantly being overloaded, reduces the life expectancy of it, okay? And so evaluation and with the code, so some people will question the code, and I tell people is that I have really, after 39 years of this, I do always question things, and I encourage you to question things. Always important to learn new things. But at some point, once it makes it into the National Electrical Code, we have to trust it. Whether we like it or not, we have to trust it. And we have to do it whether we like it or not, right? And Eliza, thanks for joining us out in Texas. Thanks for joining me. So we just kind of trust the process. And I can promise you on Code Panel 2, manufacturers, even though sometimes manufacturers have, some of them can have dubious intentions. I'm just saying that general, some of them can have dubious intentions. Some of them, not all. In this case, no manufacturer wants to have a product that's out there that get used in a manner that could cause them more grief. And so you can rest assured that this has been reviewed by the manufacturers and their standards for their devices. And this has been long standing in the code for a while. So they obviously know that even though we know a 15 to 20 amp receptacle internally is the same, other than the faceplate with the little slash, other than the faceplate, internally it's the same. We can't say the same thing for the overcurrent protected device because we could conceivably put more than 15 amps on it because it is allowed to take appliances or equipment because of the plug configuration that is going to be more than 15 amps. So it puts undue stress and wear on the 15 amp device, and we have to rely on that 15 amp overcurrent device to do its job. So they're not going to allow that, okay? All right, C, right here. So here you see C is pointing to both of, oh, you don't see C. Oh, it helps if I share it with you, doesn't it? All right, so undo, so there you go. This right here, can't do it. All right, now C says receptacles installed on a 20 amp circuit shall have an ampacity rating either 15 or 20 amperes. And we just saw that in the table. So here, again, this rule in this table is for what? 2 or more receptacles. A duplex is 2 or more. Okay, hammer that home. Okay, forever lock that in your brain. So here, 15 amps, okay on a 20. 20 amps, okay on a 20. One, because 15 is never going to overload the 20 and the guts are fine, right? It's rated for 20. And so internally, not a problem from the manufacturer's perspective. And then the 20 obviously is okay on a 20. All right. There's a note here. Obviously in our program, we always want to pay attention to the notes, okay? They're there for a reason. So branch circuits for receptacles shall not be smaller than 14 gauge. Okay, that is in 210.19D. Generally, 15 ampere circuits require 14 AWG. Okay, American wire gauge. Used to be the wire sizing AWG. Used to be the old what we call Brown and Sharp method, which is a method of determining size based on area. And so years ago, it migrated to be called American wire gauge. Now, of course, y'all all know when it gets up to 4/0, okay, which is American wire gauge. Once you get over, it's actually 4/0, but we say 4/0, which literally means 0, okay? So 4/0, 4 zeros. Once we get to the 4/0, the next size up is 250 kc mil. And of course, we used to call it MCM, but now it's kc mil. Okay, so K being thousands and mil, kc is circular mil. So a 250 kc mil is 250,000 circular mils. Don't forget, Chapter 9, Table 8 gives you the circular mils of all the conductors. That type of thing. So that's important when we do our webinar on raceway fill. So hopefully you've signed up for my free webinar. All you got to do is go to our website, click on the events tab and sign up. It's free. It's not going to cost you anything. And we're going to go all into sizing, raceway fill and all that kind of stuff. LBs, everything. Okay. So 20 amps for 12 gauge. Okay. We're just talking copper unless stated otherwise. Larger conductors may be needed to compensate for voltage drop or ambient temperature, or whether more than 3 current carrying conductors exist in a raceway or cable. Okay, so before I even go one step further, I want to talk to you one quick second about voltage drop. Voltage drop is not a requirement in the National Electrical Code, except for fire pump applications and sensitive electronic equipment. Everywhere else in the NEC, it's a recommendation. Okay, in 210, 215, 225, 230, all these areas where you may encounter a note that talks about, or an informational note that talks about voltage drop. It is just a recommendation. Now, is it a good recommendation? Absolutely. We want circuits to run efficiently. We want to make sure that we're not going to overload stuff because of the voltage working outside of the scope of the range for the equipment. Look for us to submit something about voltage drop in the 2029 edition of the NEC. But we're not going to just submit it because everybody thinks, oh, this is just the wiring cable folks wanting to make you upsize the wire. No, y'all know me better than that because I speak about that kind of stuff. We're going to have to bring significant data that shows that, again, it doesn't affect motors because motors have overloads built into them or added to them. And so if that motor starts to overheat because it falls out of the voltage range, well, the overloads are going to trip. The bad side is if the damn thing keeps tripping the overload, then you got a problem. You have to what? Go to 430.32 and go and use the be able to go to the next percentage when it's not holding, right? That's a pain in the butt, and we don't want that. You don't want that. So voltage drop can be a culprit for that. So most people, whether you're required to do it or not, will work in some type of voltage drop factor. They just will, okay? So, and we encourage you to do that, not just because it makes you go to bigger wire, not because it makes you have to proportionally increase the equipment ground, because it's just the right thing to do, okay? But that's on you. Okay, remember, it's not a requirement unless you're doing fire pumps because we want that pump to burn up or sensitive electronic equipment. That's all. All right, so back to our lesson. So now we did the duplex. Let's talk about those single receptacles on an individual branch circuit. So you remember where it allowed me to run an individual branch circuit for the refrigerator instead of being on the small appliance branch circuit? I have that allowance for that. Okay, well, when we tell you to run an individual branch circuit, it's to be on a single receptacle, okay? That's the intent, okay? So this is what we're talking about right here. That's when we say individual branch circuit, that's what we mean. And the only thing that can be plugged in it is the appliance that's intended, right? So let's kind of read it. So let's look at and learn a little bit about single receptacles, all right? D, here's a single receptacle. It's 15 amps, right? There we go. So it says a single receptacle installed on a branch circuit with no other devices, okay, or outlets shall have an ampacity rating of not less than the rating of the circuit. And that is given to us in 210.21b1. So we'll go look at it just so we all can be on the same page. I always love going to the code. By the way, if you do ask what code we're using, we're in the 2023, but this is Link. So Link is a must for anybody. It's the best $120 or whatever that you can invest if you care about the code and getting things done right. On your pocket, the same account works on your computer. I mean, dude, Link is the way to go. I was skeptical at first, but now it's the only way to do it. I love Link. Okay, it's about the only thing. I'm not going to say that. I'll get in trouble if I say what I was going to say. All right, so 210.21b, single receptacle on an individual branch circuit. Okay. A single receptacle installed on an individual branch circuit shall have an ampacity rating not less than that of the branch circuit. Okay. All right. So, and we do have some exception down here again for cord and plug connected welder applications, that type of thing, or receptacles that are installed again for motors and 430. Not germane to our topic, but just be aware that they are there. All right. So in our case, if we go back to the lesson, this is why it's 15 amps. This is why it's on a 15 amp receptacle, okay? All right, E, installing 2 or more 20 ampere receptacles or outlets on a 15 amp circuit is not permitted, okay? But this requirement does not apply to a single receptacle. Note, while there is no provision that prohibits installing a 20 amp single receptacle on a 15 amp circuit, there is a provision that does prohibit the load from exceeding the branch circuit's rating. Okay, so let's look at what it's talking about with E, right here. So this E, this is a 20, on a 15. Remember, that prohibiting rule was for 2 or more. There really isn't a prohibiting rule for a single receptacle, but you still have to worry about the load, okay? So again, there's other rules that have to be in place about not exceeding the load. And again, it's a 15 amp overcurrent protected device, okay? So we have to be aware of those things as well. Let's see, what is Dan? Dan's hollering out, says Link is awesome, but I'm worried that it will slow me down when I'm taking tests with a book. No, but you should never use Link to prepare for an exam. I'm talking about once you're in the field. So you've got to have the book. So like I said, if you're an electrician in the field, it's a must-have. If you're studying for an electrical exam, you don't want to use Link at all, okay? I use it because I'm doing lessons, but you should be using the National Electrical Code. That's why it's so important that I tell people when you see the code references that you stop and go to your code book. So yeah, great point, Dan. You don't want to use Link. Link is really, once you get that license, you're out in the field. You want to make sure you're doing things right. It's so nice to have it convenient to make sure you're doing it right. Obviously, it wouldn't do you very good to use it on an exam because they won't let you use it on an exam. And 2, you're right, it's not going to help you learn to maneuver the NEC, that type of thing. So that's why I say always use these code references, okay? And always go to the physical copy of your NEC for that, okay? All right, so let's look at F. So F right here, check this out. So this is a single. So I can't have a 15 on a 20, right? All right, remember what we could do with the duplex? All right, well, F says a 15 ampere single receptacle shall not be installed on a 20 amp branch circuit. What the general rule was, well, you remember earlier when we talked about it, a single receptacle, the branch circuit, shall have an ampacity rating not less than the rating of the circuit, okay? So this is 20 amp circuit, and this is a 15 amp, so the single rules are different. The single rule says, oh, wait a minute. I can't have a device, single receptacle, that is less than the rating of the circuit. Okay, so this would be wrong. Whereas you just saw over here, right? Where are we at here? Where it was okay to do it. Okay? All right, so important to really distinguish between singles and duplexes. That's why it's so important. That's the reason for the lesson today, to kind of make sure we hammer these things home. I don't know how many singles you install, but it's important to hammer those little things home. All right, that was F, so let's go to G. So G right here, again, you notice that we're back to an example where it is a duplex, right? And so G says a duplex receptacle is not a single receptacle. Wow. I don't know if, you know what? I guarantee you if I put that on TikTok or Instagram or wherever, that everybody would swear that if I said a single receptacle, they would say that a duplex is a single receptacle. And I know that we point to things with customers and go, well, put a single receptacle there, right? A duplex is 2. Why is that important? Well, anywhere that says you have to have a receptacle, right? You could have a duplex there, and you typically you will have actually 2 receptacles there. Okay, kind of funny. The minimum of 2 small appliance branch circuits for a kitchen. I remember doing a bunch for these college dorms. They had a very small counter. It was just over 12 inches. They had to have a receptacle for the counter and the sink. And the code required to have a minimum of 2 small appliance branch circuits. It was so small. They really, I don't know how that, but I remember when I was in school, it was, it wasn't as cramped, at least in my scenario. But these were, you could like wire maybe 30 of these damn things in a day. It was really small. And in the kitchen area, but it wasn't an efficiency. You had a separate kitchen area. The counter, so what we had to do is we had to get the minimum of 2 small appliance branch circuits. We took a duplex receptacle, broke the tabs, and we have 2 separate circuits on that one device. Perfectly okay. Okay, and did everything we needed to do that. And that was the only way that we could get 2 separate circuits there. And in our case, we did run 2 separate circuits. Okay, we didn't use a multi-wire branch circuit. We did 2 separate circuits in that day. But that was 2 different receptacles, and it was also 2 different circuits. And that's really, rather than put a two gang there and put two separate duplexes to do it, which we could have, back in the day, it was bare costs, bare minimums, and that's all they wanted, just to meet the code. That's all the university was willing to pay for. So we're like, okay, we'll put a single in there. It's very small, and break the tabs on a receptacle and get at it. So that's just an example. That was 2 receptacles that met the rule. All right. And of course, since this is a duplex right here, then same thing as we read before, 210.21b3 is going to allow us to be able to do that. Okay. All right. So receptacle placement, I'm going to skip the dormitory, right? And we're just going to get into talk about some general receptacle spacing. And y'all all are hopefully more than aware of this type of stuff, but just we want to knock it out really quickly. Wall spaces determine the minimum number of receptacles in a given dwelling. Okay, it's how much wall space that you have is determined how you're going to lay things out. Now, laying it out, you can put them where you want, obviously, but the preference is going to be so that it looks nice and uniform, but you still have minimum code you have to meet. So receptacle outlets shall be installed in kitchens, family rooms, dining rooms, living rooms, parlors, libraries, dens, sunrooms, bedrooms, recreation rooms, or similar rooms or areas to those we just talked about in accordance with the provisions of 210.52a. All right, so A, here's our layout. Here's the opening in the floor line. We measure 6 feet, put a receptacle. I can go all the way up to 12 feet to put another one. Do I have to do that? No, I can put it back here at 8 feet, 9 feet, whatever lays my room out, but that's the maximum length I can go to. Obviously, this is a break in the floor line right here, so it stops the measurement. I can measure, I go up to 6 feet. Does it have to be 6 feet? No. Now, the other question people say, what if I have a door that swings right here? Okay. Can I put it behind the door? Absolutely, you can. Right? Swing doesn't matter on that scenario. But I typically always try to go out far, either to the 6 feet or just past the door so that somebody could plug something in and the door could be totally open like that and not have to have any issue of the cord, whatever, wrapping around or something like that. So that's just my design. So I would always look at those type of things as an electrician, thinking about how the door layout should be. Okay. Same thing over here, 6 feet. And you notice this says 6 feet, but that's probably not 6 feet. But you can go to a maximum of 6 feet. Okay, both of these doors swing, so they are a break in the floor line. The reason I say that is if this had been, let's say, a sliding door, and one side or one panel is actually fixed, then the measurement, the 6 feet measurement, comes from where the fixed panel starts, and you measure 6 feet. It'll be out here. Now, this brings us to an interesting question that people always ask about receptacle placement. What if I have a glass pane, or it's a sliding door is a massive one, and the fixed panel is more than 6 feet wide, and I'm measuring from the beginning of the fixed panel where the sliding part stops, and I'm measuring it, and I'm still under the glass. What do I do? Well, the code allows you to put the receptacle in the floor as long as it's not more than 18 inches away from the wall, and that will meet the spacing rule. That is so critical, and I just got a call from a guy the other day asking if there's any way around that because it was on slab and he didn't put the receptacle in the floor on slab, and there was a wall that was full of glass. And his question to me was, is there a way around this? Is there a code exception or something that I can get away with not putting that there? And I said, really, based on what I saw, there is no. You're going to have to come in and get something in the floor. Right now, you could, it looks like crap, but I remember back in the day, in order to do certain things, we would run EMT around the floor and put the boxes if you have to, but if it's new construction, nobody wants that crap. So my advice to him, I said, yep, you're just going to have to get in there and chisel it up. And basically all you would do in his case is, if that was the case, to say this was glass right here, this was glass right here, then he would chisel from the last receptacle, he would chisel over and then put in a box right here. And then he would transition from non-metallic sheath cable right here. He would have to transition over. He could put in a raceway or whatever he needs to do and transition and do the splicing right here in this junction box. Okay. That's the only real option that I can see is for him to do that. Nobody wants to pay for any surface work and have things sit on the surface. That just would look terrible. Okay. All right. Anyway, so a lot of times on exams, I get a question, and I have one on on our competency review that talks about the maximum distance between receptacles. And a lot of people answer with 6 feet, and that's not the answer. The code says at no point along the wall line can be more than 6 feet from a receptacle, right? So on an exam, if you're asked a question, it's just a word play question, right? Is that if this receptacle is right here in the middle of this wall, then it would be within 6 feet. If you put a lamp here, then the cord could reach this one within 6 feet, or it could reach this within 6 feet. So that's the whole purpose, is to make sure that nowhere on the wall you're more than 6 feet from a receptacle. And thus, that's how we came up with the 6 and 12 foot, because no matter where you put it on this wall, you're going to be within 6 feet of a receptacle. So that's what it means when we say the 6 foot, 12 foot rule, a slang that we use, because you have to be within 6 feet of an opening, and then the maximum distance you can go between receptacles would be 12 feet, because if you touch the wall right in the middle, you're still going to be within 6 feet of receptacle, and that's what meets the intent of the National Electrical Code. These general receptacles can be 15 or 20 amp. So if you want to do your living room in a 20 amp branch circuit and you feel that's right for you, you go for it. I personally, people ask me all the time, would I wire a dwelling, the living rooms, the bedrooms in 14 gauge for 15 amps? Absolutely. Every day of the week, I would. And anybody that says that's hack work doesn't understand that it's compliant, it's code. Well, I always go above the code. That is your choice. That's between you and your customer. That's a personal preference. You do you, boo, and let the other electrician do them. That doesn't mean you're a hack. That just means that you understand the NEC. And you got to realize that the really only benefit you get with going over with a 20 over 15 is a little more capacity. To put a few more receptacles or more lighting on that circuit. But if you do everything properly and you lay everything out and you know the number of devices that are comfortable for you and you know the loads in question, then there's absolutely nothing wrong with doing 15 amp circuits and protect them with 15 amp overcurrent device. I don't have any problem with that. Let's see here. Dwelling unit receptacles, outlets, general provisions specified in 21052 apply to any part of a basement containing habitable rooms such as dens, recreation rooms, etc. Okay, so you could have an unfinished basement that you go down into, right? Which doesn't, in that case, you're looking at it and you go, okay, it's unfinished basement. Then I have a room that is finished off. Okay. Then the rules will apply to that den that will have to meet the spacing, or that recreational room will have to meet the spacing, okay? That type of thing. Caution. All right, here's some caution about you guys when you're laying this stuff out. Number one, a receptacle required by 210.52a through I shall be in addition to any receptacle that. So in other words, if you have a luminaire or appliance that's in that space that actually has a built-in receptacle, doesn't matter. You still got to meet your spacing. You still got to put the receptacle in, okay? So even though you've got a luminaire right there that has a built-in receptacle or something, now still has to meet the spacing requirements. So next, controlled by listed wall-mounted control devices a la switch, okay? In accordance with 210.70A1, exception number 1. Okay, so what this is saying is in the exception in 210.70A1, in certain areas where you have a lighting outlet, you can switch the receptacle. Okay, but what this is saying, and everybody asks me this all the time, if I'm switching a duplex, 2 receptacles, and I'm switching the top one, you still have to have the one on the bottom that's not switched in order to meet the spacing rule. You can't switch the entire receptacle. And that's what it's basically saying here. Because otherwise you wouldn't meet the 6 foot, 12 foot rule, because the one that you go from 6 feet and then the next one you go to 12 feet, let's say, if you switch that whole thing, then you're not meeting the 6 foot, 12 foot rule. You're not meeting the requirements for spacing because you switched the whole freaking thing. So, but if you switch half of it, you can meet the lighting outlet requirement by switching a receptacle in the room. That's your choice. And you still have a receptacle, remember? Receptacle spaced properly. So that's the whole reason you don't switch, okay? People ask that all the time. That's the reason you don't switch the whole duplex, okay? And see, A is joining us from Chicago. Welcome. Thanks for joining me. And Dan says, can you explain how many outlets can be on a 15 or 20 amp circuit breaker? All right, sure. In a residence, a dwelling, since we're talking dwellings, there is no number, okay? The code doesn't tell us how many you can have on it. You don't use the 180 VA per strap like you do in commercial, okay? You have to use good judgment to make sure that you evenly distribute the circuits, so you're not going to want to put so many. Now, you have some that are required to have, like your minimum of 2 small appliances, laundry, things like that, bathroom, garage if you have one, right? Dedicated equipment that requires your dedicated circuits and all that stuff. But when it comes to 15 or 20 amps general use, we have to use common sense. So some people use the rule of thumb. They'll say, well, I don't put more than 12 or I don't put more than 14. Now, if you want, you can use the concept of 180 VA to do this, right? And so if I did that and say, okay, I want to use this concept of how I do it, then you're like, okay, so if I do 120 volts and I use a 15 amp, that gives me 1,800 watts. So that would be a 20 amp, 15 amp, 15 times 120. Oops, 15 times 120. Okay, so that's 1,800. I could take that 1,800 and divide it by 180, and that tells me 10. So that's what people use, something like that as a golden rule. If I did that, I would say 10 plus I'm allowing a couple lighting outlets on it, because today everything is LEDs, and so it's not that much consumption. But as far as the code's concerned, you don't use the 180. That's for commercial applications. And so there really isn't any rule. You kind of got to use common sense in your layout, and you're not just going to loop everything, because you do know that you run the risk of overloading a circuit. And the last thing we want as an electrician, there's 2 nightmares, okay? There's 2 nightmares in the electrician's world, from my perspective. One is putting too many things on one circuit, and it's already sheetrocked, everything's done, and shit starts tripping. That's my nightmare, okay? So we're very careful about that. And we realize that, let's be honest, the receptacle loads, depending on where they're at, some will get used a lot more than others. So I don't worry so much in bedrooms, dining rooms. I'm not worried as much, right? The other nightmare for our electricians, and I know you can relate, and I know Steven 120 can relate, is when you forget to pull a home run to a circuit, or you looping stuff around and you forget to loop to something. And so when you go to the final, you've got receptacles that are dead and you can't find it. Knock on wood, never happened to me, but I got plenty of calls from people that it's happened, and it can happen, especially if you're doing a really big home. I was always paranoid about it because I used to do big multi-million-dollar homes, a lot of circuits, and I would swear, I was like, Jesus, if I'd never be able to find it, that type of thing. And so you'd have to end up backfeeding it some way and, doing the magic we do as electricians. But boy, those are your nightmares, putting too many devices and overloading something after the work's been done and you get called back, and forgetting to do home runs or making sure that you adequately loop your circuits, and so you don't have some dead receptacles or dead lighting. Biggest nightmares. I guess the third biggest nightmare as a contractor is a sheetrocker covering your crap up. And luckily, that not luckily it happens, but it happens. But luckily, using a level, it'll bow out a little bit, or where you put things, and you can kind of tell. But my brother just did a house, and I think there was as many as 10 receptacles that got covered. That's unacceptable, sheetrockers. Okay, but they're in there just zip, 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 trying to get done really quickly. But those are some nightmare scenarios that we run into. Okay, all right. Hopefully, Dan, that explained that. All right. So what else? Okay, so that's what we were talking about with this. In case you had, this is the rule when somebody asks, where in the code does it say that I can switch a receptacle, but I got to leave half hot to meet the spacing? That's the one right there. Okay. Next, located within cabinets or cupboards. Now, that does not mean that you cannot have a receptacle in a cabinet or cupboard. It just means that it does not count for the spacing requirement, right? So you could have a cabinet that has a receptacle in it or a cupboard that has one built into it, but that is not going to meet your spacing rules that you have, okay? Whether it's for kitchen receptacles, whether it's for the island stuff, whether it's for spacing around the rooms. And can you have them in a cabinet? Yes. A good example of this would be, obviously the microwave cannot be on the small appliance brand circuit, but where do you typically put it? You put it in a cabinet, okay? That's just an example of something we put in a cabinet. And the microwave goes underneath it and the cord comes up through, goes into the, okay? Obviously that one is too high to meet any spacing anyway, plus it can't be on the small appliance brand circuit anyway. That's that individual brand circuit that we're running to it. But at the end of the day, can I have a receptacle in a cabinet or a cupboard? Yeah, it just won't meet the spacing requirement. So it's in addition, that type of thing. So that's why it says right here, in addition, okay? And then lastly, located more than 5.5 feet above the floor. So this comes into play. Maybe I'm doing a bedroom and I'm putting receptacles around it, and the client wants a receptacle up high for a flat screen TV. Can that receptacle meet the spacing requirement? Yes, as long as it's not more than what? Not higher than 5.5 feet. Okay, depends on where they want it. They want to put a receptacle up high. Can you put one up there? Absolutely. And a lot of us make pretty damn good money going back and adding additional receptacles. Just bring one up higher, right? You can have additional ones. It's just as far as the spacing rule, you cannot have a receptacle higher than 5.5 feet and have it count towards your spacing requirements. That's all that means. All right. What about wall space? We hear this one all the time. Well, wall space. If I have a space between the door and let's say a closet, and I have this wall space, right? Then it says a receptacle is required for any wall space 2 feet or more in width, including measuring around corners. So again, it can go around the corner. Doesn't matter. Doesn't have to be a flat, straight wall. It does follow the lay of the corner. Again, unbroken along the floor line by a doorway or similar openings, such as fireplaces or stationary appliances, and fixed cabinets. Okay, so cabinet is there that does not have a countertop or a work surface on it. Because if it has a work surface on it, then you're still going to have to meet the spacing requirements because somebody's going to plug something in there, okay? But if it's a fixed cabinet, not something you just push over there, but it's a fixed cabinet or built-in cabinets that breaks the wall line, then that space is just like an opening. So your spacing count starts on either side of the cabinet. But if it's a cabinet that has a work surface there, then guess what? You're going to have to meet your spacing requirement regardless, okay? But now, as far as the wall space, any wall space, so this one right here in the example is 23 inches. Say over here, there's a door to the bedroom, and right here is a closet, all right? FYI, be careful when you're measuring because you do have to worry about things like the trim and when they frame it out. And so as an electrician, they're probably going to measure this when the inspector comes and he's looking at it. It's probably from the framed opening to framed opening, right? Okay. Be careful because if I had a door that was an opening, a wood that was framed in, it was 23.5 inches. I'm putting a receptacle in there. Somebody'd say, well, no, that opening's only. So on the rough end, the guy might look at it and say, hey, that's fine. It's only 23.5 inches. When this guy comes back for the final, and maybe he's not your guy, okay? A guy that you understood during the rough end, you have some new guy come in on the final, throw his ruler down and see that from door opening to door opening because of the trim and how it's framed out, he now says, oh, I consider this 24 inches. Then you got to have a receptacle in there. Just be safe than sorry is all I'm saying. Unless it's definitely obvious, just to avoid. Now, you can argue with him that the wall is the space between the molding. If you want that argument, have that argument. But it can be different on a rough end then what comes at the final? I'm just saying. Ask me how I know, because I get these calls from people all the time, okay? All right, and again, maximum distance. Again, we see this on exams all the time, and I see this on mine. Here's your distances, okay? This is 12, hold on, forgot to share it. I keep forgetting to do that, folks, so make sure I didn't forget anything. Okay, so right here, this would be required for a receptacle because it is at least 24 inches. And again, just be careful of the difference between a rough end and a final. Just make sure you don't get trapped in that. If in doubt, lay it out. All right, so here we see the maximum distance, 12 feet here. And the concept is because if I put something in the middle, I am going to be within 6 feet of a receptacle. So that's how we come up with the 6 foot, 12 foot rule. Okay, see how that lays out? All right, so the maximum distance, okay, from any receptacle in the floor line is from any point where I touch it, the maximum distance is 6 feet. So the maximum overall distance between receptacles is 12 feet, okay, from here to here. All right, so be careful how they ask a question if you're on an exam, because the maximum distance to, let's say, a lamp would be 6 feet, but the maximum distance between receptacles is 12 feet. Okay, just be careful. Never know. And again, here's your measurement around corners. Okay, not to exceed 12 feet between receptacles, so that if I put something right here, I can reach this receptacle or I could reach this receptacle. Here's that fixed panel. We're talking about it, the spacing. This is that sliding door. If this is the fixed portion, your actual measurement starts from the edge of the fixed portion. And you put your receptacle within 6 feet. If this glass happened to be all the way out here, then you would have to put one in the floor. There is no way around it. There's no exception to the rule, okay? So be careful. Make sure you ask those questions. You may see a big, massive opening in some of these big houses. I had a house that I did that was a 3-pane slider. Okay, so 1 pane slid, the second, well, it's 2 pane slider, but 1 pane slid, then you had the fixed pane, okay? And then you had another pane that slid. The middle one was fixed, right? So the end one slid in on it, kind of made like a middle pane that didn't. That middle pane was wider than 2 feet. So it required a receptacle there. There was no way around it. There was no exception to this rule, okay? It was a 2-foot wall space because it was fixed. Weird panel. But I wouldn't have known that without asking, because I just thought it was a big-ass sliding door and, you know, this type of thing. But no, there was a fixed panel in the middle and the 2 sides slid. Okay, weirdest thing I've ever seen. But if I didn't ask, my luck, I'd have been screwed. And the one that gets screwed is the electrician, always on that kind of stuff, right? All right, so again, this is where my measurement, this is where, oops, let's go to lesson. This is where my measurement would start from, right here, there. And this is a sliding portion, so I'm gonna start from right here. Does it have to be 6 feet away? Absolutely not. It can be 1 foot away, 2 foot away, 3 foot, it doesn't matter. Just can't be more than 6. Oh, what about fixed room dividers? Now, this is a question that comes up a lot. So look at this room. So this right here actually is a railing. It's dividing 2 separate rooms. So this is a constructed wall, folks. It's actually built and it's going to be framed up. Or this is going to be built as a rail and it's permanent, okay? Well, it counts as wall space. So A right here, you see A going to it. It says the space afforded by a fixed room divider, such as railings or a freestanding bar type counter, shall be counted as wall space. So if I have let's say a bar type counter and it's literally dividing the rooms, and that's something that you'll have to determine. You'll have to look at the layout. If it's dividing 2 room spaces that are defined spaces, then it could be argued that it is a fixed room divider. And of course, then it becomes a wall space, okay? Now, the one question people ask is, what about in the kitchen? I have an island, and I have an island in the middle. Well, there's receptacle requirements for the island, right? And so would the face of an island be considered a room divider? And I would argue that if it's in the middle of a kitchen, it would not. It's part of the kitchen space, okay? It's just an island. However, if it happens to be dividing the living room and the kitchen, like maybe a peninsular comes out and it is a fixed bar type counter and it's dividing two defined spaces, then I would argue that it is a room divider and that it would count as wall space. Now, would people use it because it has an overhang possibly? Whether somebody uses it or not is irrelevant, okay? Now, the only way that I could even bring an argument to somebody is that if it's a set of cabinets that are placed there and it's not an actual wall that's constructed and you move cabinets against it, right? So, for example, I could have a kitchen and I have in a living room, and I have it comes out and they build a wall out. Okay, so it's not a peninsula, but they build the wall out, and it's a wall. They frame the wall up, and on the other side of it is the living area. I had this at my house in Texas, and then the kitchen's on the other side. Is that space a wall space on the other side? Absolutely, it is. Even though they pushed cabinets up against it to put a countertop, is that on the other side of it, is that a wall? Absolutely, because they constructed that wall of framing members. They made an actual half wall and they simply pushed the cabinets to it. Well, for me, that's a wall space. Why do I bring this up? Well, because in a kitchen, my personal belief is that if you have an island that's basically just cabinets that they put a countertop on it, then you don't have any wall space. You have an island and you follow the rules in the code, which suck, by the way, in the 2023, because you don't have to put a receptacle there. You still got to get the provisions for it, but you don't have to put a totally stupid rule. Okay. Now, again, I feel for the people that say they got hurt over the years, but don't get me started on that. I don't want to go down that rabbit hole, but I think it's stupid. But if I actually build a wall in my kitchen and I push cabinet and we have cabinets against it, that constructed wall, which is what it was in the house we were building in Texas, they were going to put in the kitchen, it was a wall, and they were going to put the cabinets against it, then that is a wall. And so it is required to meet the wall spacing requirements because it was wider than 2 feet. So to me, the nuances of whether or not it's just some cabinets with a countertop on it, or it's an actually constructed wall that they push cabinets against, can make all the difference on whether or not I require receptacles on that wall versus only requiring receptacles on a cabinet. You get what I'm saying? Okay. Do you have a map? I'm lost in your beauty. I have no idea what you're talking about. Do you have a map? Okay, so I'm just talking concepts just recently, okay? So no idea what you're talking about. All right, and you can't be in love with this. So, all right, let's go on a little bit. I know I'm over my time, so trust me, I will end here shortly. All right, so this is what we were talking about, receptacles, where miscellaneous requirements. So luminaires or appliances with built-in receptacles are permitted. But again, remember what we saw earlier in 210.52a? They can have them built in, right? And they can be there. They just do not meet the requirements for spacing and counting in 210.52. So here, can this receptacle be in a Paul, hold on. Okay, so can this receptacle be in a cabinet? Absolutely it can. Does that meet the spacing requirements? Absolutely not. Okay. Mia, if you're here to just mess around and cause trouble, I will block you, so tread lightly. But welcome. All right, so this receptacle here down left is probably going to be for the spacing rules. Okay. And this receptacle up here, which may be for a microwave, made for a clock or whatever, that can be there. You can have, and what do we do all the time? We put them up above the cabinets for lighting up there and all. We can have them. They just can't meet the spacing. So, but nothing says we can't have additional stuff in there. Okay. Now, interesting note, height requirements for wall receptacles are not defined, right? So other than the rules that we know, and we'll end on this because I am running out of time. Other than we know that for when it comes to receptacles, I'm about finished, Isaac, hang in there with me for a second, I'm almost done, that we have no height requirement. Now, there might be ADA requirements in commercial work or multifamily buildings that qualify as commercial residential thing, but in a dwelling, typically we don't meet ADA, so there's nothing that says, obviously not, because we can put them in the floor. Can I put them up high? Absolutely. So there's no height requirement, except for when they have to count for spacing. And that's when we can't be higher than 5.5 feet, right? So, but can I have them up high? Absolutely. Can I have them down low? Absolutely. Can I have them in a cabinet? Absolutely. But just remember, you have to meet the ones that are required first. All these additional ones are acceptable, okay? But you have to have the ones that are required first to meet your spacing requirement. Coffee hour is every day, Monday through Friday at 8 a.m. Eastern time. Unless I have something that's going on, then it'll be a replay going. But typically, it's going to be at 8 a.m. Monday through Friday. Bring your questions. If you got topics you want me to cover, do me a favor. Make sure you send them to me at paulabernathy.com. Just let me know. Say, hey, Paul, I'd love you to do a morning show on this topic or that topic. I encourage you guys to make this morning drive what you want it to be so that you can get started in the morning with your coffee and get to a great day. All right? All right, folks, I appreciate you. Again, it was very basic topics today. Very basic, okay? But make sure this, all right. So let me real quick make sure I block this person so they never can come back. So, okay, I got them blocked so they never can come back again. Okay, so there you go. That's the consequences that you have for playing around on my stream. Till next time, folks, stay safe. God bless. Have a great weekend and be safe. Don't get hurt at the last minute. The weekend's here. For you that are doing side hustles, be careful out there. We'll see you next Monday. Till next time, stay safe. God bless.